Chapter 3. A Season for Grace. The following day, Clara's morning tasks occupied her while Nathan retreated into his silent workshop. Even in the depths of January, the animals demanded tending. She drew her thick shawl close and stepped into the bitter dawn, lantern swaying. Their cat, Shadow, appeared ghostly in the pallid light, weaving between Clara's skirts as she navigated to the chicken coop. I know, she murmured to the impatient hens. They clustered at her feet as she scattered feed, their feathers puffed against the freezing temperature. The eggs she collected were warm in her apron pockets. In the barn, Maple greeted Clara with a nudge of her nose. Clara leaned her temple against the cow's flank as she began milking, finding contentment in the same pattern, the steady ping of milk hitting the pail mixed with the hymn she hummed. This is my father's world, her mother's most loved. These peaceful moments, before Nathan surfaced from his workshop or busybodies intruded, reminded her that some factors remained constant and true. The animals' reliance, the melody of beloved hymns, faith itself, were all waiting for spring's return. Nathan had seemed different when he'd awoken. Quiet, yes, though not distant. 5 weeks earlier, he'd reached for her in the gray dawnlight, and when he'd left, he'd kissed her forehead. A small gesture, and one that lingered with her all day as a gentle assurance. Later that day at the church hall, Clara busied herself with preparations for the winter festival. The ladies had draped white muslin and tied red ribbons onto the ceiling's wooden beams, and Clara's gaze strayed to Thomas's display cabinet. The clean lines spoke of sturdy practicality, no delicate scrollwork, no inlaid patterns that drew a crowd to marvel. Where Nathan would have let the tree's natural burls tell a story, Thomas had planned them smooth. Where Nathan carved subtle leaves along the corners, Thomas created precise 90-degree joints. This was a solid piece that would last generations, even if it didn't make people weep like Nathan's work once had. The fragrance of cinnamon and cloves wafting from the simmering cider pot on the wood stove caused her stomach to flutter strangely. Not the typical nausea that accompanied her monthly courses. Something lighter, almost pleasant. She steadied herself against a table, inhaling deeply. Josephine, Thomas's wife, stepped over, placing preserves on a shelf. Thomas is bringing all 4 children in again later on. She offered Clara a quick glance. I'm sorry, I didn't mean... Perfectly all right. I'm well aware you have 4 children. Clara's hands trembled as she straightened a jar of pickled beans. The vinegar smell hit her sharply, and she retreated, pressing a hand to her waist. Different from her usual spells, the hall didn't spin so much as swim, as if looking through rippled glass. Her monthly pains should have started days ago, but hadn't come. She refrained from hoping, with her spirit worn down from too many disappointments. Nonetheless, she inwardly counted days in her mind. Thomas mentioned the Henderson Cradle Commission Nathan secured, Josephine said. First grandchild for their family. Thomas said that Nathan has the wood picked out, cherry, like the cradle Nathan built when you two first... She trailed off, flushing. Nathan had spent weeks selecting each piece for their cradle, raising the wood to the light to read the grain like poetry. He'd carved an entire narrative in the headboard, tiny birds taking flight through intricate branches as if they fluttered in candlelight. Thomas's cradles were different, sturdy rectangles with clean lines and rounded edges, impeccably functional and safe. Sensible mothers who sought cradles that could withstand multiple children found them popular. Oh, Clara replied. She'd picked up on her sister-in-law's words, although her attention shifted to the strange lightness in her body. Her dress felt snugger across her chest. She remembered how her mother used to let out seams each spring, as if bodies, like gardens, changed with seasons. The hall overflowed with women's voices. Mothers bounced babies on their hips, while girls in pressed pinafores dashed between the tables. Clara watched them through a watery haze. She didn't dare hope. And yet... "The Hendersons could afford any craftsman in the state," Mrs. Sullivan whispered, standing close enough for Clara to catch. "Imagine choosing Nathan over Thomas for their family cradle. Time was. Every new mother for miles wanted a Nathan Whitmore piece for their firstborn. Not anymore." "Thomas visited Nathan at his workshop," Josephine said, pulling Clara's attention to their conversation while rearranging jars that needed no rearranging. "Nathan hasn't mentioned anything." "You know how men are," Josephine said, "especially brothers." "Especially these brothers," Clara thought, reflecting on the day Mrs. Bradford, the governor's wife, had pointed out every defect in Nathan's masterpieces, while the villagers had stood around and gawked. Thomas was also present, standing quietly in the background, his face a mask of sympathy that Nathan couldn't forgive, for he hadn't uttered a word to defend his brother. Another wave of dizziness washed over her, and Clara pressed herself against Thomas's new display cabinet. Beyond its practical lines, she glimpsed a shadow of Nathan's old work, the carved details that once graced the church. Her hands moved to her waist, where possibility stirred beneath her dress. "You're pale as milk," Josephine said, catching Clara's elbow. "Come sit before you fall." Behind them, Mrs. Sullivan whispered to Mrs. Adams, "Exactly the same as her mother, poor girl. The Williams women were never strong." Clara pretended not to hear, but detected swift glances shifting between the ladies, like winter shadows. Mrs. Adams adjusted the cuff of her lace-trimmed sleeve, her movement precise. The act itself a declaration of propriety. "Some tea, perhaps?" she offered Clara, glancing at the steaming pot on the fellowship table. Her eyes, sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles, stayed a second longer than necessary, bright with the type of curiosity that often disguised itself as polite concern. "I imagine Nathan hasn't changed his ways, still sequestering himself in that workshop of his, I presume." "Martha," Josephine interrupted abruptly, her hand gentle on Clara's arm. "No tea, thank you. The festival arrangements need your attention." "Of course." Mrs. Adams withdrew with a practiced poise, yet Clara was aware of the woman's watchfulness. The woman catalogued every tremulous motion of Clara's hands and every hint of color rising to her cheeks, her noiseless scrutiny as unyielding as an invisible burden. The Whitmore brothers had always been village speculation, but for a long while now, the whispers involved Clara as well. "I'm fine," she said. She allowed Josephine to guide her to a chair. The familiar cramping was notably absent. She didn't dare mention it. How many times had she anticipated only to... "Aunt Clara!" Thomas's oldest boy, James, burst into the hall, his little hands gripping a wooden box as if he held a treasure. "Look what I made in Pa's shop." He thrust the box forward, and Clara's breath hitched. The boy had attempted a dovetail corner, Nathan's signature detail from his early pieces. James had matched the grain patterns along the lid, allowing the wood's natural swirls to weave a harmony, preserving a secret only it could hold. This wasn't Thomas's style. Thomas would have cut the straightest section of wood, avoiding the complexity that Nathan sought. It was the same precision that had first drawn her to Nathan's workshop 15 years ago, witnessing an artist choose the perfect hues. Josephine ruffled her son's dark hair with a mother's automatic gesture. "Thomas says he has Uncle Nathan's eye for detail." "You've matched the grain perfectly." Clara tapped the lid, recalling how Nathan guided her fingers over his work, teaching her to recognize the story. Your uncle used to mention that's how you honor the tree it came from, by letting it speak through the piece. Your father's way is different. He honors the lumber by making it strong, dependable. Pa showed me how to look for the patterns. The boy tilted the box, his grin stretching wide. Said Uncle Nathan taught him that back when... He stopped, suddenly aware of the women staring at him. Your box is lovely, James, Clara assured. Uncle Nathan made the prettiest things in the entire state. Why doesn't he do that anymore? The little boy's question froze like a blast of frost. James, Josephine scolded softly, but the other lady's hands halted over jars and ribbons. The story had become a cautionary tale in Evergreen Hollow, about aspiring too high, about arrogance before a fall. Mrs. Sullivan cleared her throat. My sister in Hartford owns one of Nathan's music boxes. Paid more than a month's wages for it. Her words carried a mixture of superiority and reproach. These days, folks want something that'll last, not just look pretty. Such a waste, Mrs. Adams murmured, not quite under her breath. All that talent. Remember the dining room suite he made for the governor's family home? She shook her head, arranging sugar cookies on a plate with too much force. Months of work, they say, and Mrs. Bradford rejected it. Besides, it was too fine for practical use. My John always said Nathan reached beyond his station. Mrs. Sullivan's cheeks reddened when her gaze met Clara's. Of course, Nathan's artistry was beautiful. Almost too beautiful, if you take my meaning. The other women nodded, a ripple of understanding sweeping through them like wind through winter wheat. Their glances were impossible to ignore, the quick dart of eyes, the slight incline of a head, while straining to catch Clara's reaction. They only slightly softened their low voices to suggest they weren't meant to be heard. Your father makes exceptionally fine cabinets. Clara curved to James, who gripped the edge of the wooden box tighter as his wide eyes flicked from one adult to the next. The women's silence spoke volumes, their gazes unfocused, sifting through memories awakened by the moment. Clara remembered, too, the crowds that had gathered outside Nathan's store, the mutters that no simple carpenter should aspire to such artistry. Well, Mrs. Adams said, fingering the cross at her collar, some might say it's God's mercy that brought Nathan down to earth. We all know Proverbs 11, too. When pride cometh, then cometh shame, but with the lowly is wisdom. Such a pity about the governor's commission, another woman remarked. Nathan has done well enough since, hasn't he? Realistic work for realistic folks. James clutched the box and edged closer to Clara, his shoulders hunching, the spark in his eyes dimming under the burden of adult complexities he didn't understand. She laid a protective hand on his shoulder, recalling someone else who once believed beauty was its own justification. Your box shows both artistry and concentration, she told him, loud for the others to hear. The truest art lies in finding the balance. They measured each word against decades of local folklore. In Evergreen Hollow, stories became parables, and her husband's fall from grace had become their favorite sermon. As the festival planning wrapped up, Clara slipped to the prayer room at the rear of the church. Late afternoon light filtered through stained glass, brushing the floor in jeweled patterns that shifted before her eyes. The recognizable scent of beeswax candles and time-worn hymnals usually provided comfort. Today it made her stomach flutter. She knelt on a cushion, steadying herself against the wooden pew. The colored light reflected on her wedding ring, and the room tilted, resembling a kaleidoscope. She closed her eyes, taking deep breaths, the way her mother had taught her during her monthly spells. However, this dizziness seemed different. anticipation rather than pain. Lord, I don't understand your plans, but something is stirring. The same as sap rising in winter trees. Please help me trust you. Help Nathan to trust you. Her whispers pulsed with light, and she pressed one hand to the floor, anchoring herself against a surge of, not nausea exactly, rather a weightlessness she hardly dared name. When she stood to leave, she studied a verse painted on the wall. Behold, I am making all things new. Revelation 21, verse 5. The phrase followed her home through the gathering dusk. A layer of snow had fallen, blurring the angel's wings. Nathan sat on the garden bench, his hands resting on his knees, looking more at peace than she'd seen him in months. The angel is lovely, he said quietly as she approached. Clara stopped, unsure of what to say. The tension between them was gentler, breakable, the snow angel connecting them. She remembered the first time she'd seen him work at 17 as his hands coaxed magnificence from raw wood. Thomas dropped by the workshop. Nathan spoke without turning. Yes, I heard. Brought James with him. Said the boy's been begging to learn woodworking. Pride or possibility flickered in Nathan's voice. He's got the touch for it, Clara. The way he looks at wood, sees what it could become. Like his uncle, she replied. Like his uncle once was, Nathan corrected. He turned to her, his striking features sculpted distinct in the fading light. The Henderson cradle, Thomas asked if he could help. There are details he can't quite master, and he'd like to learn, curves and such. Nathan's hands floated in the air as if shaping invisible wood. Clara advanced, coming close to inhale the scent of sawdust on his clothes. What did you tell him? I said I'd think about it. When I saw you creating this angel, it reminded me of expressions my father often repeated, how every piece of lumber conceals a mystery, waiting for someone with the patience to reveal it. And the courage to share it, she finished. Children's laughter drifted from the lane. Thomas's family, their home, brimming with noise and life and possibility. I've been afraid, Nathan said, his voice fraying as the edges of a brittle breeze. Afraid to reach too high again. Seeing you out here in the cold, creating such wonder simply because... He knelt beside the angel. His artisan's hands moved over the snow the way they once had over wood, gliding his fingers over the curve of the wings with a tenderness that constricted her chest. Do you know that Mother Henderson still has the hope chest I built for her daughter's wedding? Back when I thought... He paused. You can build the Henderson cradle together, Clara said. You and Thomas. The way your father and his brother did for the church altar. An unreadable reaction stirred in Nathan's eyes, longing or fear, she couldn't tell. The Hendersons want something practical, sturdy, not furniture so emotional they cause tears. Maybe that's what I forgot. He spoke more to the angel than to her. Perfection isn't about showing off. It's about... Pa, Uncle Nathan's snow angel is so pretty. James's innocent voice shattered the scene like glass as he ran to them, with Thomas trailing behind. Nathan's hand jerked away from the snow as if burned, leaving dark marks across the wing. The walls built back up, all that careful tenderness spinning to stone. Thomas turns everything into profit, he muttered, the old bitterness resurfacing, intensified by the vulnerability that had preceded it. The cradle... He stood, greeting his brother and nephew with a brief acknowledgement. I must go.